I walked into the glass conference room, nervous but ready, until she turned around. The woman I'd stopped to help on the side of Route 9, the one I thought I'd missed everything for, was standing there in a tailored suit. Not a stranger at all, but the CEO of the company I was interviewing for. I had been telling myself all morning that this was the day things might finally turn around. Monday, 7:30 a.m., sky the color of wet concrete, rain pelting my cracked windshield hard enough to make it groan. My old pickup shuddered along Route 9, heater coughing out a weak breath that smelled faintly of oil. I kept glancing at the thrift store tie in the mirror, trying to straighten it, even though it looked cheap no matter what I did. 11 minutes stood between me and the interview I'd been dreaming about for months. 11 minutes to change my life, or miss my shot. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the side of the highway next to a black BMW that looked like it cost more than my house ever had. One front tire was blown to shreds, rim bent, rain soaking her expensive jeans until they clung to her legs. She had that helpless look, hands smudged with grease, but clearly not the type who ever turned a wrench. My foot hovered between gas and brake. If I pushed on, maybe I'd be on time. Maybe I'd finally step out of the cycle of paycheck-to-paycheck repairs and overdue bills. But my dad's voice was louder than my own doubts, same as it had been my whole life. Son, you help folks when they need it. Doesn't matter who they are. I sighed, pulled onto the shoulder, and killed the engine. The pickup rattled to silence, and for a second I sat there gripping the wheel, watching the rain pound down. Then I grabbed the old toolbox that still carried a trace of my father's aftershave and stepped into the storm. Gravel crunched under my boots as I approached. She turned as I got close, eyes wide, rain streaking her hair across her face. She was younger than I expected, early 30s maybe, too polished for this forgotten stretch of Indiana highway. When she saw me, relief softened her expression, and she smiled like she'd been waiting for someone to prove the world wasn't all bad. Car trouble? I asked, crouching by the ruined tire. Yeah, she said, voice carrying that East Coast smoothness you don't hear much around here. 1 minute I was driving, the next I was spinning into the shoulder. I called AAA, but they said it could take hours. Her name, when I asked, came with the kind of pause people make when they're deciding how much to share. Amy. Amy Johnson. I got to work, loosening the lug nuts with the same wrench my dad had taught me to use when I was barely big enough to hold it. My shirt was soaked in seconds, water dripping into my eyes, but muscle memory kept my hands steady. I told her I'd been fixing things my whole life, that my dad used to say every problem had a solution if you weren't afraid to get your hands dirty. She listened like it was more than small talk, like she actually cared about what I was saying. 20 minutes later, the BMW sat on a fresh spare, rain easing into a drizzle. She pulled a stack of bills from her designer purse, but I shook my head. Taking money felt wrong. It would have cheapened the moment. How can I thank you then? She asked. Pass it forward, I said, echoing Dad's words. Help the next person who needs it. Something flickered in her eyes at that, like the mask she wore every day slipped just a little. She rolled down her window as she got back in the car, leaning toward me with an intensity that cut through the morning fog. Ryan, the interview you missed, what was it for? I blinked at her, caught off guard that she knew. Management position at Brooks Automotive. Been chasing that one for months. Her smile faltered, just for a second, like my words landed heavier than I understood. She nodded, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving me standing in the damp silence with rain dripping off my chin. As I climbed back into my truck, I couldn't help wondering if Dad was right, if doing the right thing really was worth the cost. I had no idea that the woman I just helped had more power over my future than anyone I'd ever meet. By the time I pulled into the trailer park, the rain had eased, leaving puddles that reflected the gray sky like cracked mirrors. My chest still felt tight from the choice I'd made out on Route 9. The interview was gone. No more, maybe next time. Just another closed door in a life full of them. I parked beside our little single-wide, tan siding, 2 windows that fogged up in the winter, and a small patch of garden out front where tomatoes and beans were pushing up in neat rows. It wasn't much, but it was ours, paid for with long hours under hoods and busted knuckles. Inside, Sophie sat at the tiny kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, her braids framing a face that looked older than 9. She looked up when I came in, spoon frozen midair. I'd seen that look before. The one she wore whenever she wasn't sure if she should smile or brace for bad news. "How'd it go, Dad?" she asked carefully. I hung my damp jacket on the back of a chair and sat down across from her. My tie was still around my neck, wrinkled and soggy, a pathetic reminder of what the morning was supposed to be. For a second, I thought about lying, telling her I'd nailed the interview. But lying never sat right with me, especially not with her. I missed it, I admitted. Stopped to help somebody stranded on the highway. By the time I got back on the road, it was too late. Sophie tilted her head, eyes steady on mine, waiting to see if I was angry at myself or at her for asking. Then she gave a small nod, like that answer made sense. "Mom always said you'd give away your last dollar to help a stranger," she said matter-of-factly. Guess she was right. Her words hit me square in the chest. No judgment, no disappointment, just simple acceptance. To her, it wasn't weakness. It was who I was. "You gonna be okay about the job?" she asked after a moment, her voice quieter now. She'd gotten good at reading me since Sarah died, good at sensing worry before I spoke it. I forced a smile, though this one came easier than I expected. "We'll figure it out, sophomore. We always do." She believed me, and maybe that's what gave me the courage to believe it too. We'd survived the hospital bills, the endless nights of her asking why Mom wasn't coming back, the weight of me trying to be both parents. We'd get through this, same as before. I leaned back in the chair, watching her finish her cereal with the calm of someone who trusted her world was safe. For all my failures, at least I'd given her that. What I didn't know, as I sat there with the sound of her spoon clinking against the bowl, was that the woman I helped wasn't gone from my story. At that very moment, she was making a phone call that would change everything, for both of us. The next morning, I was elbow deep in a Honda Civic at Murphy's Auto Repair, grease under my nails, and the faint smell of burnt oil clinging to everything. It was just another Tuesday in Plainfield, Indiana, the kind where engines grumbled, the radio crackled with country songs, and life felt as predictable as the ticking of a clock. Then she walked in. I almost didn't recognize her at first. Gone were the soaked designer jeans and helpless expression from the side of Route 9. Instead, she wore a simple blue dress that looked sharp but not flashy, and she moved with a quiet confidence that didn't fit the stranded motorist I'd met in the rain. "Ryan," she said, her voice warmer this time, steadier. I wiped my hands on a rag, suddenly aware of the oil stains that would never come out of my work shirt. "Amy," I replied, raising an eyebrow. "What brings you back to our little slice of paradise?" Most people I helped on the road disappeared from my life the second they drove away. Her showing up again? That was different. She held out 2 cups of coffee from a place downtown I couldn't afford even on payday. The paper sleeve was stamped with a logo I'd only ever seen in passing, the kind of shop that charged triple for the same caffeine I brewed at home. "Wanted to thank you properly," she said, handing me one. I took it, half out of politeness, half out of curiosity. The first sip was strong and smooth, nothing like the bitter stuff I made in the Mr. Coffee back at the trailer. "Appreciate it," I said, though suspicion tugged at me. She sat down on the bench outside the garage, and I joined her, both of us watching traffic crawl past Plainfield's 2 stoplights. The town wasn't much, just a handful of stubborn businesses clinging to life, but it was ours. "I feel bad about yesterday," she said finally. "You missed something important because of me." I shook my head. Nobody forced me to stop. I made a choice. My old man taught me that helping people is the right thing, even if it costs you. She studied me for a long moment, like she was weighing whether I meant it. Then she asked, "What if I told you Brooks Automotive might give you another chance?" That made me laugh, short and dry. Nice fairy tale. But companies like Brooks don't hand out second chances to guys living in trailer parks who show up late. I live in the real world. Her smile lingered, though there was something behind it, something unsettled. What if it could work differently? I frowned, not sure whether she was toying with me or testing me. Before I could press her, Sophie's school bus rumbled past. I caught sight of my little girl waving out the window, her grin bright enough to cut through the gray day. I waved back, my chest tightening with that familiar mix of pride and protectiveness. Amy, if that was even her name, watched the exchange with an expression I couldn't read. Hunger, maybe, or loneliness. "That's Sophie," I said, my voice softening without me meaning to. "Light of my life. Reason I get up every morning." Her gaze followed the bus until it disappeared. Then she stood, smoothing her dress with the kind of efficiency that suggested a schedule I couldn't imagine. But when she looked back at me, her eyes held something different, something almost vulnerable. "If Brooks Automotive calls you for another interview," she asked, "would you go?" The question carried more weight than casual curiosity. Like my answer mattered more than I realized. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I'd go." Her shoulders eased as if she'd been holding her breath. "Take care, Ryan Carter." And just like that, she walked away again, leaving me with coffee in my hand and a dozen questions rattling around in my head. I didn't know who she really was, but I knew this much. Whatever game was being played, it wasn't over. The call came while I was underneath a Chevy, swapping out brake pads. My boss answered the shop phone with his usual gruff tone, but within seconds his voice shifted into confusion. Then he hollered across the garage, "Carter, Brooks Automotive wants you back. Tomorrow morning, 9 sharp." I nearly dropped the wrench. When I took the receiver, my hand shook a little. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Janet Morrison from HR. Her tone was polite, almost apologetic, as if she was explaining away my no-show the day before. "We understand you had car trouble," she said smoothly. "These things happen. We'd like to give you another opportunity." Car trouble. That was rich. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see that BMW parked outside again. Amy, if that was her real name, must have spun some story. I wanted to call it out, set the record straight. But when life hands you a second chance, you don't argue the details. That night, Sophie helped me press my one decent shirt and fussed over which tie looked professional but not boring. She was 9 going on 19, already sharp enough to know how much this meant. "You nervous, Dad?" she asked, leaning on the kitchen counter while I polished my shoes. "A little," I admitted. "But sometimes being nervous means you're about to do something important." She grinned like she'd caught me repeating one of her mom's old sayings. Mom always said courage isn't about not being scared. It's doing the right thing even when you are. Her words stuck with me all night. The next morning, the sky finally cleared, sunlight bouncing off the glass walls of Brooks Automotive's headquarters outside Indianapolis. I'd driven past this place 100 times, wondering what it would feel like to work inside instead of out on cracked pavement with busted tools. Walking into that marble lobby, I felt like I'd stepped into another world. The receptionist greeted me with a warmth that made me wonder if my name had been flagged for special treatment. Janet Morrison appeared on the dot, clipboard in hand, stride brisk. She led me through a maze of cubicles until we stepped into a sleek conference room. A man in a suit, Tom Stevens, she said, waited with a polite smile. But it was the third person in the room who made my stomach lurch. She turned around, and my world tilted. Amy Johnson wasn't Amy Johnson at all. Standing there in a tailored suit, every inch the corporate powerhouse, was Amanda Brooks, CEO of Brooks Automotive. The woman I'd helped change a tire on Route 9, the woman who'd handed me expensive coffee at Murphy's, was the one running the whole show. "Hello, Ryan," she said, her voice calm, confident, carrying a weight I hadn't recognized before. "Thank you for coming in." I swallowed hard, heart hammering. My mind replayed every word she'd spoken to me, every smile, every hesitation, each one twisted into something different now that I knew the truth. "I think," I said carefully, steadying my voice even though the floor felt like it had shifted under me. "We need to talk." Amanda didn't flinch, though I caught something flicker in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But before we could get into it, Tom started the formal questions. I forced myself to focus, answering with the same honesty I always carried, though every word felt heavier under her gaze. Then Tom asked the question I knew was coming. "Why did you miss your original interview?" I turned and looked straight at Amanda. I stopped to help someone who needed it. Someone stranded on the side of the road, scared, with a car that wouldn't move. I chose helping that person over being here on time. Amanda didn't look away. Her next question came quiet but sharp. "Do you regret that choice?" I shook my head. "No, I don't regret helping someone who needed me. But I do have questions about why that someone thought she had to lie about who she was." The silence that followed pressed heavy against the glass walls. Janet cleared her throat, suggesting a break, and Tom stepped out with her. That left just the two of us. Me and the woman who'd turned my life upside down before I even knew her name. The room felt tight once Tom and Janet stepped out, like the air itself was waiting to hear what I'd say next. Amanda stood by the window, arms folded, gaze fixed on the parking lot where my beat-up pickup sat among polished company cars. For the first time since I met her, she looked unsure of herself. "You have every right to be angry," she said quietly. Her voice had lost the CEO polish, carrying more of the strain I remembered from that rainy morning. "Do I?" I asked. "Because right now, I'm not sure what game I'm playing here. You lied about who you were." "What?" She turned, face softening. "Because I wanted to know who you were when you didn't think it mattered. I spend my life surrounded by people who want something from me. I needed to see if your kindness was real or just calculated." I studied her, trying to decide if I was hearing honesty or just another performance. Before I could push further, Janet's voice broke in from the hall, sharp and urgent. "Amanda, emergency at Plant 2. Major equipment failure on line 3. Amanda's face tightened, and within seconds she was all business again, tapping her phone as she rattled off questions. I didn't think. My body reacted the way it always had around broken machinery. "What kind of failure?" I asked, already moving for the door. Amanda blinked, startled. "Ryan, you don't work here." "Not yet," I cut in. "But if you want to know who I really am, let me show you." 20 minutes later, I was in the passenger seat of her BMW as she wove through traffic toward Plant 2. My mind was already working, flipping through possibilities: hydraulic failures, belt slips, sensor malfunctions. She drove like someone carrying the weight of more than one world. Jaw set, eyes focused. Between us, silence stretched, but it wasn't hostile. It felt like we were in this together, at least for the moment. Plant 2 was chaos when we arrived. Machines hummed and clanked across the floor, but line 3, the big one, was dead. Supervisors barked into radios. Engineers stood in clusters with clipboards and furrowed brows. I could smell the tension as clearly as I smelled the burnt hydraulic fluid. Tom Stevens hurried over, relief washing across his face when he saw Amanda. "We've been down 2 hours. Every minute costs us thousands. Nobody can figure it out." I crouched beside the massive drive assembly, hands tracing the lines of steel and hoses like they were veins in a body. I'd been in enough shops to recognize the signs. The frustration was familiar, good men staring so hard at a problem they couldn't see the simple thing hiding in plain sight. "Has anyone checked the secondary filter housing on the hydraulic reservoir?" I asked. Tom frowned. "We changed all filters last month." "Primary filters, sure," I said, sliding out from under the machine. "But there's a secondary housing most people forget about, hidden behind the main panel. Clogs up faster under heavy production. Seen it before." I shrugged out of my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, and barked for a 3/8 wrench and a flashlight. Within minutes, I was on my back, crawling into the guts of the machine, oil dripping onto my shirt. The crowd behind me muttered, doubtful. Amanda stood with her arms crossed, eyes locked on me, watching every move. 30 greasy minutes later, I pulled out the clogged filter, black with buildup. "There's your problem," I said, holding it up like a trophy. Tom called for a restart, and the whole place held its breath. The conveyor whirred back to life, smooth and steady, parts moving in perfect rhythm. The sound rolled across the plant like a sigh of relief. "How did you know?" Tom asked, staring at me like I'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "Because machines talk if you know how to listen," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Sometimes the answer isn't complicated. It's just hidden." Amanda stepped forward then, her voice low but clear. That was impressive. I met her eyes, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. "That was just Tuesday afternoon. This is who I am." She studied me for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "I can see that. The question is, do you want to do it here?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because the bigger question wasn't about the job. It was about whether I could trust the person offering it. The next morning started like any other, me frying eggs while Sophie packed her backpack, cereal boxes and homework papers scattered across our little kitchen table. I was still thinking about the plant, about how it felt crawling into those machines like I belonged there more than anywhere else. But mostly, I kept replaying Amanda's face when the conveyor came back to life. Half admiration, half something I couldn't pin down. Then came the knock. I opened the door, expecting a neighbor or a salesman. Instead, Amanda Brooks stood on my front steps in a tailored suit and polished shoes, looking like she'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine. She was so out of place against the backdrop of our modest trailer park that for a moment, I almost laughed. Amanda, I said, stepping outside before Sophie could see. This is a surprise. I needed to see where you live, she answered plainly. No rehearsed corporate lines this time. I needed to understand who you are before asking you to trust me. I glanced around at the rows of trailers, the small gardens, the kids' bikes tipped over in driveways. Neighbors had already started watching, curiosity hanging in the air. I gestured toward our little lot, where tomato plants pushed up through rich soil Sophie and I had turned by hand. This is it, I said. Not much to look at, but it's home. Amanda studied the scene with careful eyes, her expression softening. It's honest, she said quietly. I spend most of my life around people who measure everything in profits and margins. This feels real. Before I could answer, the door swung open, and Sophie came bounding out with her backpack half-zipped, hair in loose braids. She froze when she saw Amanda, reading the tension the way only kids who've lived through too much can. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked, suspicion written all over her face. I forced a smile. "Sophie, this is Amanda. She's someone I've been working with." Amanda crouched down so she was eye level with Sophie. "I'm the lady whose tire your dad fixed," she said gently. "He gave up something important to help me when I was scared." Sophie looked at her, then at me. "That's just what Dad does. Mom used to say it was his superpower." Her tone was so matter-of-fact it nearly broke me. Then, in the blunt way only a child can, Sophie asked, "Are you going to give him the job?" Amanda's composure cracked just a little. "That depends," she said, choosing her words carefully. "It depends on whether your dad wants it." Sophie didn't hesitate. "Of course he wants it. He's been practicing interview answers in the mirror for weeks. He wants to give me a better life, but he feels guilty about leaving Mr. Murphy." My cheeks burned, and I gave Sophie a gentle but embarrassed nudge. She just grinned, hugging me tight before surprising Amanda with a quick hug too. "I hope you give Dad the job," she said simply. "He deserves good things." Amanda looked shaken, and I couldn't blame her. Sophie had a way of cutting through the noise, saying the truth adults danced around. We watched as the school bus pulled up. Sophie climbed aboard, waving until she disappeared down the road. Then the two of us were left standing in the quiet morning, sunlight spilling across our little garden. "She's remarkable," Amanda said softly. "She's the best thing I ever did," I replied. Pride filled my voice before I could stop it. Then I turned to her. "Now, why are you really here?" Her eyes dropped for a moment, and when she spoke, the words carried weight. 3 months ago, my father died. He built Brooks Automotive from a two-bay garage into what it is now. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what he was really building. He believed a company was only as strong as the people working for it. That profits meant nothing if you treated people like they were disposable. Her voice faltered, but she pushed on. "The board wants cost-cutting, layoffs, benefit reductions." I was driving to a meeting to approve it all when my tire blew out. And then, "I met you." I stayed quiet, letting her words hang between us. "You reminded me what my father built this company for," she said, her eyes searching mine. "This isn't about charity, Ryan. It's about me trying to honor his legacy and needing someone who won't let me forget what really matters." I studied her, looking for the polished CEO mask. But what I saw wasn't strategy or spin. It was a woman trying to fight her own world to do the right thing. Amanda stood there in the morning light, her words hanging heavy between us. I could see the struggle written on her face, caught between the cold demands of a boardroom and the simple truths her father had built the company on. "So," I said, crossing my arms, "what exactly are you asking from me?" Her answer came steady, but not rehearsed. "I want you to join Brooks Automotive. Not because of what happened on Route 9, not out of pity, but because you see problems differently. You cut through the noise. That's the kind of leadership my father believed in, and it's the kind I need by my side if we're going to turn this company around." For a second, I just looked at her. The offer should have felt like a dream come true. Everything I'd been chasing finally landing in my lap. But dreams aren't free. I'd learned that the hard way. "You're asking me to step into your world," I said slowly. "That's no small thing. But before I agree, I need two conditions met." Her brows lifted slightly. "Name them." "First," I said, "I'm not the kind of man who walks out on people without finishing what I started. Murphy gave me a job when nobody else would, and I owe him a proper handoff. If I take this, I need 2 weeks to train whoever replaces me." Amanda nodded without hesitation. "Done." "Second," I continued, "before I sign on, I want you to sit down to dinner with me and Sophie. Nothing fancy, just our table, our food. If I'm going to work for you, my daughter deserves to know the person making such a big change in our lives. And you deserve to see who we really are." That one gave her pause. Her polished composure faltered for just a breath, like nobody had ever asked her for something so simple. Then she gave a small, genuine smile. "I'd like that." The weight in my chest eased just a little. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe the ground beneath me wasn't shifting out from under my boots. 2 weeks later, I walked through the glass doors of Brooks Automotive not as a desperate job applicant, but as the new operations manager of Plant 2. Sophie had picked my shirt, a crisp white one with tiny silver dots she swore looked professional but not boring. In one hand, I carried the briefcase Amanda had given me. In the other, my father's old toolbox. One felt strange and new. The other felt like home. That first day was a blur of meetings, facility tours, and paperwork that made my head spin. But the best part wasn't in the office. It was on the floor, talking with men and women who looked at me with cautious hope, workers who'd lived too long under managers who never dirtied their hands. During lunch, I overheard one of the veterans murmur to another, "Carter seems like good people. At least he knows which end of a wrench to hold." That meant more than any title on a nameplate ever could. When I looked up later that afternoon, Amanda was in my doorway, leaning casually against the frame. My father's toolbox sat in plain view on my desk, right beside Sophie's school photo. Amanda's eyes softened when she saw it. "How's your first day?" she asked. I leaned back, feeling the weight of the moment. "Busy, overwhelming, but it feels right." And for the first time in a long time, I actually meant it. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where Amanda's secret had first come out. Back then, I'd felt blindsided, like the ground had given way beneath my boots. Now, the air carried something different: celebration. Brooks Automotive had just landed the biggest contract in its history, a 5-year deal that meant stability for hundreds of families across central Indiana. The kind of stability men like me had always dreamed of but rarely trusted to last. Amanda stood at the head of the table, posture sharp but voice warm. "Plant 2 has exceeded production targets for the third straight quarter," she announced. "Quality is up 20%, efficiency up 15%, and, most important, employee satisfaction is the highest in company history." The applause that followed didn't sound like corporate politeness. It was genuine, rolling across the room like thunder. Even the board members, men and women who had once pushed her to slash jobs and cut corners, were nodding with approval. It turns out, results speak louder than fear. I didn't say much during that meeting. I didn't need to. My part had been on the floor, building trust with the line workers, fixing bottlenecks before they became disasters, listening to the guys who'd been ignored for too long. My father used to say the best solutions usually came from the people closest to the problem. He'd been right. After the meeting, Amanda and I walked out together, a routine we'd fallen into over the months. We passed through the parking lot side by side. She still drove a modest sedan now, said it kept her grounded. I believed her. "Any regrets?" she asked, echoing the same question she'd asked me after the plant emergency. I looked back at the building, at the glass walls that reflected the sun, at the place where I'd spent the most satisfying months of my working life. "Just one," I said. She tilted her head, concern flickering across her face. "I regret it took a flat tire and a missed interview for us to find each other. All the time we wasted before we figured out how to work together." Amanda smiled then, an unguarded, genuine smile that felt far removed from the carefully composed self I'd first met. That evening, she showed up at our trailer with a chocolate cake from some fancy bakery in Indianapolis and a grin that said she didn't care how out of place she looked carrying it across the gravel. We ate at the same little table where Sophie and I had shared cereal and homework, and for the first time, it felt like success wasn't something distant or fragile. It was sitting right there with us, sweet as cake, simple as laughter. I realized then that transformation doesn't always come in grand speeches or boardroom victories. Sometimes it comes in shared meals, honest work, and the quiet knowledge that dignity doesn't have to be sacrificed for success. Dinner that night felt more like family than business. Sophie sat across from Amanda at our little kitchen table, her elbows on the laminate surface, eyes bright with curiosity. The chocolate cake sat between them, half gone already, crumbs scattered like confetti. Sophie, never one to tiptoe around, leaned forward. Amanda, do you ever miss being rich? Amanda nearly choked on her coffee, caught off guard. I tried to hide a laugh behind my hand, but Sophie's bluntness was nothing new to me. She'd always had a way of cutting straight to the point. That's a fair question, Amanda said once she'd recovered, meeting Sophie's gaze with the seriousness it deserved. And the truth is, I was never really rich in the ways that matter. I had money, yes, but I didn't have friends who cared about me for who I was. I didn't have work that felt meaningful. I didn't have people like you and your dad reminding me what's important. Sophie nodded, satisfied. So friendship is worth more than money. Amanda smiled. Exactly. And chocolate cake tastes better when you share it with people you care about. Later, after Sophie went to bed, Amanda and I sat on the front steps watching stars scatter across the Indiana sky. The night was cool, crickets humming in the distance, the kind of simple peace you can't buy. Ryan, she said softly, do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that morning? If you'd just driven past me and made it to the interview on time? I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. Sometimes. But then I remember what my dad used to say about regrets. He told me regretting a kind act was like apologizing for being human. Every time you help someone, you're betting the world is worth the effort. Even if it doesn't pay off the way you expect, you're still ahead, because you prove to yourself you're the kind of person who makes that bet. Amanda was quiet for a long time, staring up at the stars. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, I said, and he would have liked you. He'd have seen in you what I do. Someone trying to honor the people who came before while building something better for the ones who come after. When she finally stood to leave, Amanda paused at her car door. Ryan, thank you. For stopping. For trusting. For reminding me that the best way to honor someone's legacy isn't talking about it. It's living it. And thank you, I said, for giving me a chance to be part of something bigger than myself. For showing Sophie that work can be meaningful. That good people can win. As her taillights faded into the night, I stayed on the steps, thinking about the strange chain of events, a flat tire, a missed interview, a choice to help a stranger that had led us here. None of it had been planned. All of it had been worth it. Inside, Sophie slept soundly in her room, her desk piled with books and scholarship forms that no longer felt like impossible dreams. On her nightstand sat a business card Amanda had given her. In bold letters under Sophie's name, she'd written, Future Engineer. For the first time in years, I felt certain about tomorrow. Certain that kindness, even when it costs you, is never wasted. And certain that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most important rewards.